Support for Central Florida Public Media comes from JustCallMo.com and attorney Mo DeWitt. As a Central Florida native, Mo DeWitt is committed to offering legal guidance in personal injury cases such as car accidents and slip and falls. Offices in Orlando. More at JustCallMo.com. Welcome to Engage, leading conversations that matter. Engage is made possible with support from inaugural sponsor JustCallMo.com and the support of listeners like you.
You are listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Coming up, we'll look at efforts to provide housing and other services for homeless people living with mental illness. Also, we explore the world of literature in Central Florida. We learn about the 2024 Orlando Book Festival, visit the Kerouac House, and speak with the festival's keynote speaker, Tayari Jones. But first, Central Florida Public Media is part of a special statewide investigative collaboration looking at what the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act means for our region. The Florida Wildlife Corridor Act identifies some 18 million acres of land for conservation. It was signed into law in 2021 after receiving unanimous support from state lawmakers. It's supposed to protect wildlife and natural resources and mitigate the impacts of climate change. Well, we're exploring the impact of the corridor on Central Florida, which is a rapidly developing region. In partnership with the Florida Trident, WGCU, and Oviedo Community News, Central Florida Public Media environment reporter Molly Durg put together several installments of a series called Preserve or Develop, the Race Against Time to Protect Florida's Wildlife Corridor. Molly joins us in our studio to share some key takeaways from her months of reporting on this. We're also joined by Oviedo Community News reporter Eric Orvieto. You both worked on this statewide reporting collaboration a long time. Eric, let me start with you. What are some of the questions you were looking to answer when starting this project more than a year ago now?
When I first thought about the project with our editor, Megan Stokes, I wanted to look into the impact of the corridor and specifically in Central Florida and what it actually does. We have so much rural land here, especially in Seminole County with our East Rural area and our rural boundary. I wanted to see what the protections really were and how they could be strengthened, or if development would just continue to occur through the non-protected areas. It's such an important topic in our area, our local area specifically, but we learned it's throughout the state as well.
Molly, let's talk about some of what you learned. What did you uncover that surprised you about the Florida Wildlife Corridor?
Yeah, well, one of the very first things I think that kind of surprised me was learning that of the 18 million acres of land within the corridor, 10 million acres are currently protected, but 8 million acres are not protected. So those are called opportunity areas is the language that's used. So basically this outline of 18 million acres of land within the Florida Wildlife Corridor, not all of it is protected. So there's still a lot of work to be done. So that was sort of like one of the main first things that really drew my attention and that I had to kind of keep reminding myself of working on this project is we're talking about the corridor, not all the land in the corridor is protected. And then another really big takeaway is that of the land that is protected, which is the majority of it within the corridor, it's not the corridor itself protecting that land. It's a mix of state agencies, local, federal, private entities, protecting the land in a variety of different ways, whether through conservation easements or fully acquiring, buying up the land. But it's not the corridor itself protecting that land. It's sort of a mix of different agencies protecting it.
Your first story, Molly, focused on Split Oak Forest Wildlife and Environmental Area. That's in Orange and Osceola counties. Let's listen to a brief clip of some of your reporting on this.
In Central Florida, large natural landscapes like Split Oak Forest are becoming fewer and farther between. That's why communities, local and state governments, and other agencies dedicate lots of time and resources to protecting these environmental lands from development sprawl. It's why state lawmakers passed the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act in 2021. It's a vision, a goal for 18 million acres of interconnected lands to set aside for conservation.
This is really significant swaths of Florida that are going to be used for wildlife protection and outdoor recreation for generations to come.
But how protective are Florida's conservation protections? Along Orange County's southern border with Osceola County, a toll road is set to pave over part of the protected Split Oak Forest. A mitigation package from the Highway Authority is supposed to make up for the damage with millions of dollars and thousands of acres of other conservation land for the state.
I think it does meet the threshold of what our duty is of protecting fish and wildlife for the future, because we're getting additional lands.
But many in Central Florida aren't convinced.
When we asked the voters of Orange County, 500,000 of them said, protect Split Oak. They heard about the road, and they said, we want Split Oak protected.
Anderson and others wonder how to trust the new mitigation land will stay protected, given what's happening now with this supposedly protected land.
This month, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission voted to remove part of the forest protections to allow a toll road expansion. So, Molly, what is the purpose of the Florida Wildlife Corridor then?
Right. So the purpose of the Florida Wildlife Corridor was really to sort of attract attention and resources, time, energy, money, sort of to point, hey, here are the lands that are most important to protect in Florida. That's really the purpose of it, to draw attention, mainly from lawmakers, but again, from other agencies, many different types of agencies that protect land, that acquire land. That's really what the purpose of it is to try and draw attention to what has been scientifically shown to be some of the most ecologically important lands and waters in the state. But that's really what it does, is it's calling the attention to those lands. It's not offering in itself, the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act in itself is not offering any legal protections or anything over the land. At least 6 different entities have stake in protecting Split Oak Forest. You've got Orange and Osceola counties, 2 of them right there. You've got the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. That's the other one. You've got the South Florida Water Management District. You've got the Florida Communities Trust. So you've got all these different agencies invested, again, separately from the corridor, in protecting this area. The idea is that it was protected in perpetuity, but the terms are being changed. And again, that is happening separately from the Corridor Act. The Corridor Act, again, is just to signal, hey, these lands are important to protect. This is an example of one of the lands that was protected, that is protected still, but now the terms of those protections are being changed.
This is just one of the many stories that you both have worked on, exploring what this corridor actually means for Central Florida in the context of our rapid region development. Eric, it's kind of hard to ask you to summarize more than a year of work, but could you share some of the key takeaways that you uncovered in your reporting that you would like people to know about?
Yeah, there's a lot of green space that's loved throughout this state that can still be developed on. One of the things I learned was that the importance of local involvement is key, because with residents and voters involved, officials have more of an urgency to protect these spaces or come up with alternative solutions. There's definitely ways to work with development that I didn't realize that I think are available to lawmakers and to officials. But community involvement is really key to getting these places noticed.
Eric, did you find any benefits to the wildlife corridor?
Yeah, I did. So we went into this looking into what the corridor is and does it work. What I learned was it's a visual guide, like Molly said. It's a guide. It's a series of maps that really highlights these areas throughout the state, this connected area. And the benefit of that is it allows lawmakers and officials to see where the places are that they can go in and help start protecting or continue protecting. One of the instances that I've been working on separately, a story that I've been working on separately, was the Yarborough Ranch sale to Florida Forever, which is about 1,360 acres of land that was key in the corridor to close off a connection point and keep it in conservation. And officials used the corridor maps to show Florida Forever that this is an important space, and that helped get that piece of land bought by Florida Forever and put into conservation. And so there are definite benefits to the corridor, even though the act itself might not have regulatory teeth. There's still a lot of benefit to it in saving these lands.
Okay, so Molly, what is the corridor providing?
It's a messaging campaign. It's a way to frame where the most important lands and waters in the state are. And that is determined scientifically by the Florida Ecological Greenways Network, which actually has been informing Florida's land protection program since 1997. So this is a massive GIS database, like databases on databases, this Florida Ecological Greenways Network is, that is evaluating the value of the lands. It's evaluating surface waters. Where are there important surface waters? Where is there really critical habitat for endangered or threatened wildlife or important wildlife? And it's measuring all of these things at once. It's a hierarchical database giving, different points to different areas depending on how many of these very valuable assets that they have. And so I had the chance to speak with one of the creators of the Florida Ecological Greenways Network, Tom Hochter, at the University of Florida Center for Landscape Conservation Planning, and he really helped shed light on sort of what these two entities are and what the corridor means in that context.
Even though I might be the person who started the Florida Ecological Greenways Network, working with lots of partners, and one of the founders of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, I know that we can't just focus on it. We have to continue to balance protection of these large rural landscapes with other additional areas that are important for conservation.
There are other lands outside of the corridor that are also important to protect. The corridor is just a really great focal area for especially the larger natural landscapes that connect well to one another, that could work well for wildlife movement. But it's important for many other things as well, just preserving the waters, preserving the ecology of Florida.
That was Central Florida Public Media environment reporter Molly Durg and Oviedo Community News reporter Eric Orvieto. You can find each installment of the series Preserve or Develop, the Race Against Time to Protect Florida's Wildlife Corridor on our website, cfpublic.org. Coming up on Engage, an area nonprofit focuses their homeless services on Central Floridians living with mental illnesses. And later, we preview this year's Orlando Book Festival. If you miss any part of our show today, you can listen on demand at cfpublic.org. I'm Sharon Stone. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Ahead on this program, author Tayari Jones used her experience of growing up in Atlanta when a serial killer was terrorizing the city as a backdrop for her first novel, Leaving Atlanta.
Although it has that heaviness of the fact that 28 Black children were murdered when I was a kid, and I knew 2 of them, but there is also in writing the pleasure of remembering my childhood.
Jones is a keynote speaker at this year's Orlando Book Festival. She joins us later in our show. Right now, though, last year, the Homeless Services Network tracked a 75% increase of unhoused people since the pandemic started in Central Florida. Those living with a mental illness can get trapped in this cycle of poverty, vulnerability, or lack of resources that keeps them on the streets. Orlando-based Dave's House has a unique method of ending homelessness for adults experiencing mental health problems. The organization is now developing their new residential community in Seminole County to provide permanent supportive housing. Ellen O'Connor is the executive director. She joined Engage to talk about how supportive housing is the cornerstone of the Dave's House model and what makes this approach different.
We provide that critical service that is lacking in so many communities for not only affordable housing, but what we call permanent supportive housing. So we're providing this service for adults who have a diagnosed serious mental illness. So these are people that have chronic conditions like schizophrenia, severe bipolar, dysfunctions that would not allow the individual to live a normal day-to-day life without support. So it's affordable because we're only charging 30% of their income. And the wraparound services are everything from case management to training to help with their finances, wherever they need support, a full continuum of care that we are able to provide with our partner, Aspire Health Partners.
Who qualifies for this housing and what parameters are there for qualification?
We work directly with Aspire Health Partners, and Dave's House are collaborating in this effort. And what we are working with individuals who have been homeless, they've gone through a transitional housing program, and that means that they've gotten off homelessness, they've been able to stabilize, get on medication management, be observed for up to 18 months. And then after that period, they would apply. And if they have shown that they can manage some of these life skills that are necessary to live independently, and we have housing available, then they would be considered an applicant for that.
Can you talk a bit about the day-to-day for residents in Dave's house?
Being a Dave's House resident means being productive and working on your life goals, which is something that really inspires me. So a lot of these people, in addition to managing their mental health challenges, many of them have overcome addictions, whether it's alcohol or drugs that they had self-medicated themselves with. So they're clean and sober. They are managing their medications, and they're pursuing some type of productive day, productive schedule. It could be working, it could be volunteering, it could be going back to school, it could be just pursuing some education that they are interested. We have several residents who are going through college coursework right now.
Can you help me understand the difference? You talk about the cycles of homelessness for people living with mental illness and how breaking that cycle differs from someone who is homeless, maybe due to some bad circumstances.
Well, I think it's just another layer of complexity. I mean, I think that most people who have found themselves homeless probably have a variety of obstacles that they're overcoming. The population that we're working with, many of them were not able to have their mental illness diagnosed. And in some cases, they self-medicated, as I mentioned. So I think the complexity is that if you have a serious mental illness, it's not going to go away. It's a chronic condition, so it's something you have to learn to live with. And part of that is medication management. Part of that could be counseling. And what we find again and again is that foundational element of having stable housing is what keeps people grounded and able to work on some of these other issues. If they have the anxiety and the stress of worrying about where they're going to be next, will they be safe? It layers on another challenging part of their remaining stable.
And what else would you like our audience to understand, or what do you wish people understood more?
I think it's the impact that having someone with a chronic mental illness has on the family and their whole network, because we get calls every day from family members that they can't have the person live with them. It's not working out. It's incredibly stressful. A lot of older parents who are kind of aging out of the situation where they can be the caretaker or the person that is helping them. And so it's really critical that they have that stable housing. So I think we have been able to meet a critical need that hasn't been met. We've done it with high quality housing that's affordable. And the priority for us now is to get more, to provide more housing, to make sure that people are not, renting a room, living on someone's sofa, potentially giving up hope and taking their own lives, which it's the most devastating.
So what's next for Dave's House moving forward?
The next step is really to ensure that we are able to provide more housing. We have gone through the initial stages of identifying the location in Seminole County. We've had some of the initial fundraising, which has been successful, and now have identified land. So we have to go through the process with the government there in Sanford, but we're very hopeful. In the past, we've had scattered single-family homes. Our concept now is to build a community where the residents can really be part of that community, where we can bring in services that they may need and training and activities. And we're just very hopeful for what the future has for Dave's House.
Ellen O'Connor is CEO of Dave's House. The 2024 Orlando Book Festival takes place this Saturday, a day of events that includes panel discussions for both readers and writers, book readings and signings, and a keynote address from New York Times best-selling author Tayari Jones. The Orlando Book Festival is organized by the Orange County Library System. It takes place at the public library downtown there on Central Boulevard. Sarah Fisk is the events and programs planner with the Orange County Library System and coordinator of the festival. Fisk joined us in studio to parse out this year's events. She started our discussion by explaining who the festival is programmed for.
It is for a general reader audience. That's what we say. We try to get a good mix of genres as far as the authors who come so that there can be a little bit of everything, something for everyone. So we have, middle grade authors, we have young adult authors, we have nonfiction, historical, science fiction, fantasy, and then, of course, our keynote, Tayari Jones.
That just sounds like a very just diverse audience there that would be interested and that you are hearing from as well.
Yeah, we also have specifically panels that are designed for writers as well. So every hour during the panels, 10:30 to 1:30, there is a panel that is designed for a reader audience and a panel that is designed for a writer audience too. So writers can also come and learn a little bit about writing and the publishing industry as well.
I'm curious, what's the most popular genre, I guess, that you encounter at the library that people are interested in?
Well, the most read fiction genre in the United States, and I think also the world, is romance by far. It is about 40% of the fiction market. So it is a big one. It's also the first panel that we have is about romance. So we're capitalizing on that. As far as events go, science fiction and fantasy authors are always very popular. But then this year we have the panel, Let's Talk About Florida, which is, we have 3 Florida-focused authors on it. And so that's going to be really interesting for people too.
Yeah, let's talk a bit more about that. Do you think that Florida people have become more kind of self-aware of the memes about them?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, there was I remember this meme going around a while back that was Google your birthday in Florida Man to see, what happened on your birthday. And there's something for every day. So I definitely think that people are more aware of it and the way that people perceive us. And I think that some people have leaned into it and, kind of had fun with it. So
would you say that that is something that you can learn more about by going to this festival?
About Florida Man?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we do have Tyler Gillespie, who does have a book called Florida Man. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be really good. And it's more about, I think the panel is going to be more about the way that they portray Florida and the way that they sort of work around this idea of Florida and either lean into it or challenge the ideas that people might have about Florida.
Who would those panels be appealing to?
Yeah, so on the second floor, the panels that are located there mm-hmm. are primarily for a general reader audience. Some of them are genre focused. And then the panels on the third floor are the ones that are more writer focused.
Okay.
But people still really enjoy the writer focused ones too, even if they're not necessarily writers, because you get to hear a little bit about the author's processes or the publishing industry. And then our third one is actually about researching history. So if you're into history, that might be a good one for you too.
Sarah, I want to know about you. What are you excited for?
Yeah, I'm really excited for Tayari Jones. Whenever I found out that we were going to be able to get her as a keynote, I was very excited. I also am really excited for the panel that we have we have 3 different middle grade graphic novelists, including Newbery winner Jerry Craft. And so they're going to talk about both writing but also illustrating, and we might get them to do a little drawing demo too. So it's going to be really fun, especially for the kids, but also for the adults.
Something I wanted to ask you about is, with everything just being online, electronic, do people still go to the library?
Oh, yeah. People especially go to the library for events, and that's my entire job, so that's great. But people who come into the library, too, I think to have it's one of the few remaining free third places that we have. So people come in for meetings, to hang out with each other, to just have some quiet working time or have something for their kids to do. So people are in the library all the time. They're very active. If you go to the library, especially, at certain times of the day, like right after school has gotten out, you'll see it's just packed. And then we also have really great events that draw people in.
Sarah Fisk is the events and programs planner for the Orange County Library System. The festival takes place Saturday at the Orlando Public Library downtown. First panel discussion begins at 10:30 in the morning. The Jack Kerouac Project of Orlando is one of the organizations participating in the festival this weekend. You know, the origins of the writer's fame can be traced to a cottage in an Orlando neighborhood where he lived when his defining novel, On the Road, was published in the late 1950s. That College Park house is now home to a writers in residence program where selected applicants live and work in the same place where Kerouac did.
We used to do readings, public readings, just open mic readings in the early days of the Kerouac House. And there were several open mic readings that sprang out of that other people started their own poetry readings and open mics and recitals and things like that. And now the Orlando literary scene, I believe, is one of the strongest in the United States. And a lot of that started just because the Kerouac House used to hold these open mic readings in the early 2000s.
That was Eric Deckers, author and president of the Kerouac Project of Orlando. Deckers joined Engage to talk about the Writers in Residence program and how Central Florida factored into Kerouac's fame.
He lived in New York. He had written a novel called Town and Country. It was good. It was well received, but it wasn't a commercial success, and very few people know about it. And he lived in Orlando in the College Park area in 1957 and 58, and that's where he was when On the Road was published and where it was reviewed in the New York Times book review. And that's what made him famous. The reviewer really liked that book, and people found it and read it, and it launched the entire Beat generation. But that reviewer was not the original regular reviewer for the New York Times. He was actually a fill-in for the original reviewer who was sick, and we know from history, would have hated Jack's book. So it was almost an accident that Jack became famous at all. But he was in Orlando at the time that the book came out. He actually had to borrow bus fare from his girlfriend to be able to go up to New York to be there for the launch of it. And so he returned to Orlando, and he actually wrote his next book, The Dharma Bums, in 11 days on a typewriter and amphetamines, and produced the original draft of The Dharma Bums in the same house.
Wow. I want to talk more about that house, but you mentioned that this launched the entire Beat generation. Let's help us understand the significance of that.
The Beat generation was sort of the expression of poetry. They were the predecessors to the hippies, although Jack did not like the hippies, but they were some of the first counterculturalists in the 50s and were doing things like poetry in coffee shops and this nomadic lifestyle that Jack wrote about. And they were more disaffected in the 50s than their parents had been. And so then we saw in future generations, they were more disaffected than their parents had been. So like rebellion feeds rebellion, but it didn't start in the 50s, but it's certainly there are people alive who remember when that started and were shocked by what we would consider mild behavior now, reciting poetry in coffee houses.
So we've talked a bit about his role in Orlando and just how much he's tied to it. Tell us about the Jack Kerouac House here in Orlando for people that don't even know that it is here.
Sure. So the Kerouac House is a Sears and Roebuck kit house that was built over 100 years ago. And in the late 1990s, Bob Keeling, who used to be a TV reporter here in town, was doing a story. He had heard a rumor that Jack had lived in College Park. So he actually called Jack's step-nephew, I believe it was, and got the location of the house. He went and saw that the house was in bad condition. It was falling down. It looked in really bad shape. He did the story about this. And because Jack actually lived in Central Florida 2 different times, a few miles apart from each other. But this was the house where sort of he launched everything. This is the house that, made his career. And so he talked to several people, several patrons of the arts and philanthropists, and they pooled some money, bought the house, and started the Jack Kerouac Project of Orlando, and turned it into a year-round writer's residency. So they started in 98, and their first residence happened in the fall of 2000. And the idea is that one writer can spend 3 months of their time in the house for free, where they get to work on a project of their choosing. And so they don't have to pay rent, they don't cover utilities. The Kerouac project covers all of that. We even provide a stipend for people to do that, and we get applications from all over the world at the start of every year. Every January 1st, we start the submission process that runs through March, and we get 300 to 400 applications from around the world. I was the spring 2016 writer in residence, and I had moved down here from Indiana before my residency started. And so then, I live in Oviedo, and I would just drive to and from the house Sundays and go home on Thursdays. And that's how I spent my residency. But we've had other residents from India, from Ireland, Singapore, New Zealand, and then all throughout the US. And then after I finished my residency, I was asked to be on the board, and I accepted and worked on it for about 6 years. And then a year and a half ago, became the president of the board.
How did that impact you as a writer? Like, why was it so significant for you to write in this house versus staying at home in your own house?
Well, for one thing, I had, at the time, 3 younger kids that always made writing time difficult. But I think more importantly, for me, it was a validation of how I felt as a writer. I had been writing for a long time, but I never thought I was very good. And if anything, being in the house, being accepted to the residency actually kicked up my imposter syndrome quite a bit.
Really?
Because I felt like I had fooled people. I'm a humor writer. And I think I may be the only humor writer we have ever had in 85 residents. And I thought, I felt guilty, like I had fooled people. And so I thought I have to work really hard because they're going to realize that they made a mistake and they're going to kick me out. So I need to show that I've made a lot of progress on my novel. And I wrote the first half of my first novel there. But I had to work really hard. So when they showed up, I could say, no, look, I've done things. I haven't wasted this time. But it also made me realize that I actually was fairly good at what I was doing. And so it did validate sort of the choice I had made those many years before to become a writer.
What did you feel after the residency was over? Or maybe what did you hear from other residents, how it was for them after their time was up?
I've talked to other residents about this, and they sort of feel the same way. Maybe they didn't get imposter syndrome, but they felt validated, because most writers tend to have self-doubt, and we're very humble about our own abilities. And I think many of us suffer from imposter syndrome. And so to be told, hey, you've been selected from all these applicants from all over the world, you get to be in this house and nobody else does, that feels good. And we think, oh, maybe I can do this. And so many of us left with a sense of relief and accomplishment that we did this, and that somebody thought enough of our work that they wanted to give us this place to stay in this wonderful house for free for so long. And for a lot of people, it didn't create new opportunities for them, but it felt like they could seek those brand new opportunities.
Eric Deckers is the president of the Jack Kerouac Writers in Residence Project of Orlando. Coming up, we'll speak with novelist Tayari Jones about cultivating her writing voice and her travels to Africa. Jones is the keynote speaker at this year's Orlando Book Festival. I'm Sharon Stone. You are listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. In 2019, Tayari Jones published her 4th novel, An American Marriage. The book chronicled the fictional relationship between a man falsely accused and incarcerated for rape and his wife waiting for him on the outside, and it immediately shot to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. Oprah chose it for her book club. Former President Obama put it on his summer reading list. Jones's childhood home of Atlanta serves as a backdrop to her novels that focus on family dynamics, racial inequity, and the changing landscapes of America's Black communities. Her first novel, Leaving Atlanta, is a fictional account of the Atlanta child murders told through the perspective of 3 grade school children. Jones herself lived through that fear that gripped Atlantans in the early 80s. 2 of her friends were victims of the real-life serial killer. Tayari Jones has been invited to deliver the keynote speech at Saturday's Orlando Book Festival. She joined Engage earlier this week, and we started the conversation by asking Jones about her feelings about talking about writing in Florida, a state that in the past year had sanctioned book bans in public libraries and schools.
I think it's very important that authors come to Florida, especially right now when we are facing, the book bans, et cetera, because I think that when people ban a book, usually they haven't even read that book. They just saw the title of the book or some demographics about the author and decided that, no, this book is not for us. It is a different thing entirely to ban or reject a book when looking at the person that wrote that book. Yes, a book is a physical object, but it is the product of the imagination of an actual person, an actual citizen with an actual story to tell. So I think it's important that we show up and be the physical human embodiment of our work.
Who are you writing for as an author?
People ask me that sometimes, but really the process of writing, it's so involved between myself and the page. Do you remember when you were a child and your teacher would tell you to keep your eyes on your own paper?
Yes.
I feel like that when I write, I have my eyes on my own paper. I'm doing my best to tell what I believe to be the truth of the world as I understand it. And once the book comes out, I want it to reach as many readers as possible, but I'm especially moved when people who have shared the experience about which I'm writing, when they say they recognize themselves. But I also write to introduce those people about whom I'm writing. I want to introduce them to the world also.
Meaning your characters?
My characters, but also the people and cultures and communities for whom they are avatars, Like the great thing about reading a novel is that you get to visit another place, whether it's a place that's familiar to you or one that isn't. So I think about, now this is going to show my age, but remember how records used to have an A side and a B side?
I do.
Yes, and when you buy a record, you are buying the A side and the B side. So sometimes I think that when you write a novel, there is kind of an A track that is immediately recognizable to the people that you're writing about. But there's also a B track where other people listen to it and they're like, oh, well, this is interesting. So you do both. I don't think you have to choose an audience. I think that's a myth.
You're writing about unresolved injustices. We're talking about the handling of the Atlanta child murders, wrongful incarceration, families. How do you feel when you're writing about it? Is it a relief? Is it feel like you're getting something off your chest? Do you feel empowered because you're informing people?
I must say that I have never in my whole life gotten anything off my chest. Anything that was ever on my chest is still there. I think when I was a young person, I would read about these authors saying how they release their stories and they feel so much better. That's not me. When I write a story, I feel like I'm reliving whatever it is that I'm writing about. And I have the whole range of experiences that you have in life. So, for example, my novel, Leaving Atlanta, about growing up during the Atlanta child murders, although it has that heaviness of the fact that 28 Black children were murdered when I was a kid, and I knew 2 of them. But there's also in writing the pleasure of remembering my childhood. I remember when I was writing this book, I had a piece of paper in my notebook with the names of all the candy that was popular in the 1970s and 80s, and the pleasure that I got compiling that list. I think that's one of my main goals in my work, is to say, none of us, our lives are not merely our tragedies. That the tragedies hit us, they hurt us, but we also live full lives. So that is always my goal, to get the whole life, the whole story.
So you don't want, and please, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, you don't want someone to finish your book and just feel worse?
No, because here's the thing. When you ask who I write for, who's my audience, the last thing I ever want to do is for someone who experienced whatever trauma I'm writing about to finish my book and feel worse. That is a disservice to someone who has already been through something. I always have a pathway to hope in everything I write.
Do you ever feel pressure or some kind of expectation that as a Black author, you have to write about issues like this, like racism?
You know, I do feel that pressure. And so for my first books, I very much would kind of really contain my stories to families. I'm very interested in family dynamics. And I felt like my white colleagues, they can write about their problematic families and people think that's a work of literature. So why do I, as a Black writer, need to write about the world, racism, systemic oppression? And I resisted it. But then I kind of realized that in resisting the expectations, then I'm still allowing the expectations to inform what I write. So I like to think that I write like in an American Marriage, you know, about a young couple separated by wrongful conviction. Yes, that is definitely a very clear story about the way racism impacts people's lives. But it's not the only thing that I write about. And I think that's the thing you have to realize when confronting expectations, is that expectations tell you you can only write about one thing. But I like to write about lots of things. So sometimes, yes, I confront racism. Other times, I confront the drama that is known as being a member of a family.
I think that's something we can all relate to, for sure.
Indeed. Happy Mother's Day.
So, it's one thing to be a successful fiction writer, but it's another to be a writer whose work is kind of helping define our culture. Work it's being acknowledged by policy influencer. Like, how does this define you as an author?
You know, when I'm writing, I can't think about Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey. I can't think about any of that because I have to be completely immersed in the story. My goal as a writer, when I'm actually sitting down and writing, is I want to feel the way I felt when I wrote my first book. When I wrote my first book, I didn't even know what an agent did. I didn't know anything about the business. I had no expectation of readership. No one had ever really paid me any attention before. And so I felt like my first book is my most honest book because I was in conversation with my own little heart. Yeah. And I try to get back there because if you write knowing that it's going to be read by powerful people, it's going to steer the story, and you can't let status quo and power steer your story.
You also teach undergraduate creative writing at Emory, and you were at Spelman starting at 16 years old, and that was an extremely pivotal time for you cultivating your writing voice. So what makes that, late teen, early 20s window so crucial in a writer's development?
When you're in your late teens, early 20s, you have the chance to determine which direction your life is going to go, and you can make those determinations without completely rearranging the furniture of your life. So you can decide you want to be an artist. And the main thing is you setting your heart on it, making your intention and declaring yourself. You don't have a family to support that will say, well, how are we going to pay these bills if you want to be a writer? You're a kiddo. You don't have those bills. Really, you just have to be brave. And so that's the time. I mean, that is a little brief window. College is so short. It's just 4 years. It's a brief window in which you can jump in with both feet.
You attended a safari last year in Africa. I'm curious about what you brought back that might have informed some future writing you have planned.
When they asked me did I want to take this, I was writing about it for Travel and Leisure. And I was thinking, I don't want to go on a safari. I've always thought there's something slightly racist about saying you should go to Africa, this very densely populated continent and look at animals. I said, I don't want to see any animals. I want to meet the people. I want to go shopping. I want to go to Lagos in Nigeria. I don't want to go to look at animals. But it was just after the pandemic. We had been locked in the house, and I said, I will go. And let me tell you, I am an indoorsy person by personality. I am indoors. I went out there, the great outdoors. I saw animals. I saw birds. I saw endangered species. I am a believer that everyone should explore the natural world. How will this affect my work that is normally set in Atlanta? I think it's given me an appreciation for the natural life in the city. Like, I still have my binoculars that I bought for the trip for the safari in Zambia. And I look out my window sometimes and I look at our squirrels. That's all we got here in Atlanta. We got some squirrels, some chipmunks, some fairly interesting little birds. But I realize that we are all experiencing the natural world, even in the cities.
You're making me think. I, too, am someone who likes to be inside. So maybe I'll try this outdoors experience you're speaking of.
Look, the safaris at this company called Bush Camp Company, it was the best of both worlds. There was plenty of indoors, lovely high tea and things you associate with being on vacation. Mm-hmm. But you get out there. I was like within 3 feet of a rhinoceros.
Was that scary?
No, the thing is, those animals, they're not even concerned about you.
You're right.
They're just also, it makes you realize how small you are in the world's ecosystem. That elephant, it could care less about you. It's primarily interested in getting that fruit off the tree. It doesn't care about you. You are not the center of the world. You have been led to believe you are, but no. I mean, God has made a very large, complicated world full of amazing creatures, and you're just one of them.
Ms. Jones, is there something that you're looking forward to in Orlando?
You know what? The main thing I'm looking forward to in Orlando is really meeting Florida readers. I think Florida gets a bad rap in the national imagination. I think that part of the reason why, books are being banned in Florida is because books are being read in Florida. And I'm just really eager to get here and talk to people and see how people are feeling on the ground and encourage people to write their own stories. We all have a story to tell. And I think that Florida readers and writers need to bear witness to their experience. So I hope we can all come together as friends of the written word, friends of our shared American stories, and just come together and fortify ourselves for the long march forward.
Tayari Jones is a keynote speaker at Saturday's Orlando Book Festival. That's all for today's edition of Engage. We'll be back Thursday at 3 o'clock. All of our shows are available on demand at cfpublic.org. I'm Sharon Stone. Thank you for joining us. All Things Considered is next.